A successful album rollout needs to feel like an event that the fans are a part of, and sometimes the best ways to do that is to actually create a character and a narrative for the fans to identify with, and good examples of that are what The Weeknd did with After Hours, wearing that costume year round, and also what Tyler, the Creator, did by creating an alter ego for Call Me If You Get Lost. And the whole idea behind that is that they're drawing us into a totally different universe, and it creates a sense of escapism, and that's exactly what I love about album rollouts. So that's exactly what we'll be talking about today, is kind of the decline that we've seen in album rollouts in the modern era of hip-hop, and kind of where the strengths lie for album rollouts and where the weaknesses are, right?
This is a great conversation because a lot of people have been having it, especially on Twitter or Reddit. So we decided to bring it to the podcast, guys. But thank you to the Patreon members for choosing this topic. So for this week, you guys had the option to vote for new rap albums dropping before the summer of 2021, which got 6 votes. Then we had what happened to album rollouts in hip hop, which won with 12 votes. And then every scrapped Kanye West album, which got 6 votes. So guys, if you want your say on the next episode, the link in the description is now live. You can access our Patreon content there. So going back to this piece of content, man, it's a good conversation, especially for us fans, because, you know, a lot of artists, or let's say camps, say, hey, you know, you guys don't have marketing knowledge, or you guys don't know really what you're talking about. But over the years, we're the ones that have been receiving these rollouts, and we're the ones that are directly affected by them. And now more than ever in modern hip hop, fans are actually, you know, not only judging the music, but how the music has been delivered. So, you know, where do you think the strength lies within album rollouts, and what makes a good one?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I mean, it's all about having that narrative and kind of, you know, creating a character, feeling like we're entering a new era of an artist, for example. And that's, you know, them changing their look, changing kind of the direction of their sound. But I just feel like, you know, in today's modern day, the rollouts have become lazy, and it kind of seems like there's a formula that everyone's sticking to. And, you know, examples of that are kind of just posting an album cover with a track list, previewing songs on Instagram through snippets, and then just releasing the album without any real context as to what we're in for, right?
And it kind of hurts because, you know, oftentimes like you're left making your own sort of narratives on the album because, you know, back then there was a lot more creativity to it. You know, obviously there was maybe more of a market share for artists and marketing budgets, and there was probably more room for creativity. But now I feel as if it's just gotten so robotic to the point where you're kind of formulating your own rollouts for yourself. So a big thing is obviously the snippets, right? Like, which artist hasn't posted snippets about their music or given previews to the albums? Yes, it's nice, but I also kind of go into albums now knowing half of the track list already because I've even heard that song or someone has sent me that leak. So how do you like that whole formula of the snippet game?
It's just annoying, man. At a certain point, I mean, it's cool to hear previews because it gets the fans hyped, but at a certain point, it's just enough is enough, and I want to save that for the actual album. You know what I mean? If I would have it my way for the most part, one reason why I enjoy surprise albums, which kind of sort of became a trend in the 2010s, but we've seen that only certain artists like Eminem can do it successfully. But overall, I just feel like, you know, hearing these snippets kind of gets annoying because I want the album as a whole. I kind of want that element of surprise. But in terms of the rollout, I want to feel like I'm going on a journey with the artist and that we're building up to this big moment, which is the album drop. So let me ask you this. Which album rollout trends do you think should come to an end, and how has streaming affected rollouts?
Well, streaming has affected the rollouts in maybe a negative way if you put it like this, because people now want the music quicker. They want it on demand. Like, everything has to feel robotic. So the whole point of the rollouts back then was to create this emotion and this sort of aura around the album. And now that everything's getting digitalized and people are consuming their music at a faster rate and maybe a more effective rate, you could say that that's maybe a possibility and a positive aspect of it. But it ruins the natural nuances of the rollouts. Like, you don't feel that sort of emotion anymore. You don't feel as if, hey, I got to be hyped for this. You're like, oh, okay, it's coming out now. I've heard like 5 snippets already off of it, and I know the track list. I know the cover. Let me just go into this. So you could say that, yes, maybe it's more effective because, you know, artists are taking less time with it. That's another thing that maybe I like about it, is that, you know, shit hasn't been built up over 5 years.
Shorter rollouts are better.
And we've been seeing that, let's say, in 2021, which we're going to be talking about on good rollouts this year. But for the most part, it feels lazy. It feels like there's no more emotion or care given into it. But I'm gonna rebound that question back to you. How do you feel about the industry now with all of these, let's say, lazy rollouts?
Yeah, I just feel like a lot of artists feel the pressure to have that single that really is strong enough to carry the fans into the album. So if that first single doesn't hit, they'll probably extend the release to put out a second one and see what the streaming numbers end up being on that. And the issue too is that it's like you said, with the streaming era, people want things right away, and the patience, the attention span is just not the same way that it used to be. So artists feel maybe less inclined to actually have a rollout that's carried out for some time, which honestly, I feel like between that range of 1 to 3 weeks is optimal in today's era. But I mean, that's up for debate and depends how the artist does it. But guys, we'll be taking you now through the bad and the good. So 3 modern rollouts that have been really bad and that kind of portray what's been going on in this modern era, but 3 very good rollouts that have happened in recent years that have kind of inspired other artists to carry out the same kind of formula. So let's start off with the bad and let's talk about Joyner Lucas's ADHD, which came out in 2020. And it's crazy because he was building so much buzz in the late 2010s after his viral hit I'm Not Racist came out, after he did the remixes of songs like Mask Off, DNA, Gucci Gang. There was a lot of serious buzz around his name, and in 2018 he announced ADHD, but the album only came in 2020. So where do you feel like Joyner Lucas went wrong with this rollout?
9 out of the 18 tracks were previewed and released before the actual album had been rolled out. I think that was just like the one thing that really killed it off, because not only that, but he started rolling these out in 2018. It was like from the first single that was released back in, like, I believe it was 2018, almost 527 days later,
exactly,
the album came out later. So it's like you have almost 2 years to sit with somewhat of an album because you're getting 9 singles, and then once you get the actual album, you realize that the quality is not there and they're just trying to pitch you the good material at first. So you go into the album with some sort of hype. And I remember the reception on Twitter was kind of mixed, because you had the Joyner Lucas fans that were like, hey, it's cool, I'm getting all of the music beforehand. But then there was the hip hop community that was like, dude, what's the album? Like, it feels like he released one album in the span of, let's say, a year and a half, and then he released something completely different on the day it actually dropped.
You know what's crazy is that out of the 9 songs that we hadn't previously heard from the singles, 4 of them were skits, meaning that when the album came out, as fans, we only got 5 new songs.
That's horrible.
How crazy is that, man?
But that's the thing is, like,
what do you attribute that to? Like, is it writer's block of him not being sure of the project after announcing it? Like, I'm trying to wrap my mind around what it is, but the issue too is that a lot of artists are kind of sharing the similar fate. We're seeing Logic this year with Bobby Tarantino 3, where he dropped like 5 songs out of, let's say, the, what is it, like 13 song project?
Yeah, I don't have it on the top of my head, but this is what I think it is that maybe it's the record labels that are doing these sort of rollouts. Like, who knows? Like, maybe they know more than we do, in a sense where they know what their artists can do and they know what their artists could do. So in the case of Joyner Lucas, they probably created a marketing rollout that best suited his analytics and that best suited, let's say, previous rollouts on, let's say, mixtapes or singles that I dropped prior. So maybe it was that, or maybe it was a case of them trying to be creative with it, because this was one of the first times that we've ever seen this style of rollout.
Yeah.
So it was kind of weird. And I think maybe it also tried to copy the way Denzel Curry had done it, where he had released the album in acts.
That was genius, though.
But it was genius because you understood the overall complexity of the album. Like, it was meant to be done that way, because if you would have gotten the album in whole one shock, you wouldn't have understood the layering of the track list. But in the case of ADHD, there was none of that. It was just singles after singles, and it wasn't stretched over, let's say, a month like how, Denzel Curry had done it in 2018. It was stretched over 527 days. So I think that's what kind of killed it off, and kind of, it sucked for him, because this was his debut album, correct?
It was his debut album,
That sucks. Like, he had so much hype and anticipation around them, and I feel as if since ADHD has dropped,
you haven't heard much from him,
like,
and I mean,
sucks.
he even had the Eminem feature on Lucky You, so he had a lot of hype. But I wish the best for him, and I hope that the next rollout is better.
He's a talented
because
lyricist.
he's a very talented rapper. But let's move on now to Culture 3, which came out this year, and this is an album that I think the both of us were anticipating for a long time. And we first got word in 2019 that the Migos were, they had finished rolling out their solo albums, and they were ready to come back as a group. And finish off the trilogy of the Culture series. And of course, it ended up being pushed back because of the pandemic in 2020. And now when you hit 2021, it's been 3 years since you've gotten a Migos project. So of course, the pressure is there to deliver something great. And it just wasn't that. So take us through kind of your emotions when you first heard the album being announced, because it was announced in February, on February 14th of this year, where Quavo said the album is dropping by the end of March, which it didn't. So Take me through how you experienced that.
Well, I'm going to take it a bit before because Need It had dropped with NBA Youngboy on May 22nd of 2020.
Right.
So that was the lead single. And at that point, I was already in that Culture 3 zone. I was like, okay, this might have some actual, I would say, potential to drop this summer. Like, that's how I felt when I'd first heard, what they were doing. But obviously, as time goes on, that summer, nothing ever dropped. Then you fast forward to October, and then the Modern Day snippet drops, and the hype is absolutely unreal. There was people that were saying, hey, this might drop by the end of the year. They might actually do it. Doesn't end up happening. Then you go into 2021. Quavo, I believe, was on Valentine's Day on a date with Sweetie, then says, hey, listen, album's coming at the end of March. Okay, fucking great. An actual member of Migos actually announced it. Guess what happens? Nothing actually ends up coming out of it until April, until you get the DJ Khaled album, and then you could start to see, like,
But
okay,
before
now
that,
they're starting
though,
to get it.
Before the whole DJ Khaled thing, they were actually doing a great job of getting me excited for the album. They were posting, snippets of them in the studio, videos, and I'm like, okay, this is actually happening. We're getting it very soon. And for that, like 2 to 3 week span, I thought the album was on its way, and I was, at my optimal level of being hyped. But then it didn't come. And like you said, around that DJ Khaled period where they had their song on there, I can't remember the name of it, but it was with her. That's when we saw them being very quiet, and there was no real word of when the album was to come. And that's when we started asking ourselves questions like, what the fuck happened to this thing?
Yeah, like a whole album rollout had started in March and April. And listen, that would have been cool. Like, they would have gotten probably much better reception if it would dropped at that time.
Yeah.
But you go
and the window of opportunity too. Sorry to cut you off, but the window of opportunity for them to drop in that March-April slot when no one else was dropping, they would have had so much momentum carrying over into the summer, man.
Because you have to keep in mind that they also had to compete with Hall of Fame by Polo G, so that probably took away from their rollout. And it's not the issue of that they probably extended it too long or whatever it is. It was the disorganization of this rollout. Like, there was too many rumblings, there was too many things that had happened. The lead single had dropped a year before. Like, the only guy I think that could get away with that is Drake with Laugh Now Cry Later. Like, that's probably going to end up being the lead single for CLB, and you see that the hype is probably just as optimal because it was able to do it. And it's not to say that the album didn't do commercial numbers. It put up 130,000 streams first week. There was some bangers on there.
130,000 copies.
Yeah, 130,000 copies that sold first week, and it ended up dropping on June 11th, but it was like, it was all over the place. Like, how do you go silent a month before your whole album ends up dropping and just end up putting that out? Like, hey, take it, and that's it.
Yeah, not only that, but like the singles that they had released didn't do well commercially. To me, they weren't, top tier Migos stuff. So my excitement level had dropped by the time that I had reached June, and I was like, all right, now we have this album cover of the three heads.
Yeah, even the album cover and the the packaging.
This is not selling me at all. And like, they didn't even seem excited about the music, to be honest with you. It didn't feel like a Migos moment. It didn't feel like they were putting out these crazy visuals or music videos that were really, getting us hyped.
Like they were Bad and Bougie and T-shirt for the first installment.
Exactly.
But there was a different aura around the first Culture, and this was actually a rollout that I maybe wanted to include in this episode, but it was because you had the whole situation with Donald Glover at the Grammys, and then after, was it at the Grammys?
I think it was at the Golden Globes.
Either one of them. Don't quote me on that. Listen, if I made a mistake, drop it in the comments. But, there was this whole conversation going around like, listen, Migos are going to be dropping an album of the year contender. And that's exactly what they did. And then you got fire visuals. You got some of their best material. Even Culture 2 was nice because they did it perfectly. They captured that same sort of nuance and that same sort of energy as they did with Culture 1. And everyone tuned in for Culture 2 to see if they were able to match that.
And they doubled their album sales with Culture 2. And then we see the decline in sales, and also just in terms of, how receptive the fans are to the music, because I feel like this project will unfortunately be very forgettable. But nonetheless, let's talk about another album rollout that kind of took too long to get going, and that's YBN Nahmir's Visionland, which dropped this year in 2021. And what's interesting is that, Nahmir had a lot of hype going for him in 2017 and 2018 because he had smash hit singles such as Bounce Out With That and Rubbing Off the Paint. And I don't know why he chose not to capitalize on that hype when he had it, with those bangers in the late 2010s. Because the thing about, carrying those singles into your album and attaching those streams into an actual album, like, it would have been perfect for him. But instead, he waited and waited kind of until the whole YBN crew dismantled. And also, until he put out this single called Two Seater with G-Eazy and Offset on March 19th, 2020. And then after that, not too long after, he put out No Op Stop with 21 Savage. And a year later, the album announcement came, which, didn't excite anybody, to be honest.
It was a mistake of him not to drop it with those 2 singles. That was, I think, the worst part of that whole rollout because, Opsop actually ended up going viral on TikTok. So there was some sort of commercial presence within his name. The name was getting revived, but it's just like, too many times I feel as if rappers just wait, and obviously that's attributed to so many different things. It's not the rapper's fault. We're just mentioning the rappers because they're the ones that are creating the music, and we're not going to start like naming, record label execs here. Like that's not our thing. But once you get into that zone of like, okay, you're releasing singles, you're doing super well, but you wait 2 years to drop your debut album. What are you really gonna do? And then after that, you revive your whole rollout with dropping 2 singles that have very decent commercial success, and then you drop Visionland, which is coming almost like I would say half a year later. So where do you find yourself? And that's when the fans get disappointed because they go into Visionland, and not only were they disappointed by the rollout, but the music was absolutely horrible. Like you could capture
it was really bad.
I don't want to clown him or anything, but when you're putting out your worst material after having a lot of good singles that have done commercial success, you've gotten some of your fans ready to go back into your album, and you're delivering material that doesn't even sound finished or doesn't even sound like it's real music at the end of the day. Where does the rollout even go? Like it's non-existent.
Yeah, what boggles my mind is that, internet and social media presence will not equal album sales, and that's something that a lot of record labels and artists don't understand, I feel like, because YBN Nahmir has nearly 4 million followers on Instagram, but only sold 4,000 copies first week with Visionland, and like the album didn't even chart in a single territory, man. Like it was awful. No one was listening to this album, and the only talk that it really got was the song Soul Train, which went viral for being horrible and for being a terrible showcase of auto-tune usage. And I mean, I think that is up to like almost 400,000 dislikes on YouTube right now for the music video, or for just the song audio. But again, it's another case of artists kind of taking too long to release an album and not capitalizing on the hype that they initially had.
Do you think it's also a case of the record labels kind of fucking the artists by not putting out the music for them? Like
for sure, man. I mean,
who
knows if Nahmir wanted to put out an album earlier, but the label's like, no, let's write it out. Let's capture some more hype. Let's build up your catalog of singles more, and then drop the album. So we'll never really know the situations per se on every album rollout, but at the end of the day, we're just, from the fans' perspective, it wasn't properly calculated. Man.
It wasn't properly calculated. And 2 out of these 3 rollouts had that same nuance. Culture 3 and this Nahmir project was just that same sort of vibe, like teasing, then not teasing, releasing material, then not releasing the album, just all over the place and completely disorganized. But let's get a bit more positive on this episode now. Let's move on to the great rollouts. And we have 2 of them in 2021 because there is some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think we're going to have to start with Tyler, the Creator's Call Me If You Get Lost. You mentioned that rollout at the beginning of this episode, and I'm super excited to talk about it. There's so much to look forward to with Tyler's catalog as the future goes on. But let's talk about this album. Where do you think he went right with it? And why do you think it was so well accepted amongst his fans and amongst the industry as a whole?
Yeah, because Tyler created a mystery for his entire fan base. He created this imaginary universe, and I mean, just the way that the rollout started with the billboard, it was very mysterious because you had Call Me If You Get Lost written, then you had a random phone number. So fans, of course, random people probably actually, living in Los Angeles, called that number, and Tyler fans or just music fans picked up on the fact that it was a conversation between Tyler's mother and Tyler himself. And then that was kind of the way to announce the album. And then, even the fact that you got something like Side Street, which kind of sets up the whole love triangle theme for the album. He just gave us little Easter eggs before the album drop, and that's just an amazing way to take us through a journey. And like I said earlier, create this narrative before we even hear the music. And him, the way that he was dressed, the fact that on the ID for the album cover, he had the alter ego name of Tyler Baudelaire. It was just perfectly executed to me.
He introduced you to the whole album before you actually had to go into it. Yeah. And then it was like he introduced the surface level perfectly, and then you go into the album, and that's even better executed in the way that it was layered and the way the track listing went, and then the whole love triangle that went in it. And from a fan's perspective, I'm just going to talk about the podcast because that has probably been one of my favorite rollouts to cover this year, because then you got a great single like Lumberjack that comes out, and you hear that DJ Drama is going to be narrating this project, and it creates an extra layer of hype, because then you find out that Tyler's going to be going back into this hip hop mode that we didn't see on Igor, but that we had gotten on Flower Boy. And then, you know, you go into the whole album and you're absolutely mesmerized because you're getting some of Tyler's best storytelling in years. You're getting fantastic production. You have great features. And as an overall journey, it's been fantastic. Not only that, but he just announced that he's going to be doing a tour in North America. So he's not only, you know, extending this rollout, but he's closing it off with a tour where people are going to be able to hear this music live. So Tyler's been doing this for such a long time, and it's creating these crazy characters and being able to communicate it to a general audience. Because if you look at how well this did commercially in the first week, it's absolutely mesmerizing that he's able to take such complex characters and communicate it so well to a general fan base.
Yeah, and he did it with Igor, and he did it again now. And I just love the fact that Tyler drops these Easter eggs, and they create a mystery. They leave us asking questions. And to me, the biggest ones were, who is Tyler Baudelaire? And also, which sonic direction is Tyler going in? Because he totally went away from the hip-hop sound with Igor, and now he drops Lumberjack, where he's like rapping hardcore. So it makes you think, is he returning to that, you know, old hip hop sound where he's very aggressive and abrasive and, you know, has this unforgiving delivery? Or will he also, you know, include components of, you know, R&B and, you know, more soulful stuff, which the song What's Your Name, you know, showed us? So it was cool because he also set up, you know, through the lyrics of Lumberjack and What's Your Name, that idea and concept of traveling. And that really, you know, went full circle with the album. So let me ask you this. What do you think was the number one, you know, most pivotal, you know, kind of thing that Tyler gave us in terms of information before the album came out?
It was for sure Lumberjack, because because I think that's when everyone was like, okay, we understand what he's going to be doing with this album. You're not getting another Igor. You're not getting something that has more of like a neo pop influence. You're getting something that's going to be different now. So I think it was that, but I also think it was the types of narratives that were being made around this album, because think about it, you have to make an album that gets the fans talking, that gets the whole industry talking. You're communicating to two different types of consumers. So from my standpoint, from the fan standpoint, it was cool because there was different narratives. Now, hey, he's going back to hip hop. Hey, he's going back to an aesthetic that I had seen on old projects like Goblin. Hey, he's coming back and he's completely reinventing his name while maybe dropping the last hip hop album that we might ever see from Tyler. So there was so much different shit that went in it. Not only that, he dropped it at the perfect fucking time. This guy's a genius. If this guy would have had to done this rollout with Donda, forget about it. It would have been completely scrapped, and he would probably have to wait for his turn to do it. Not only that, but he dropped it at the beginning of the fucking summer. It's probably the most played summer album alongside with the next album we're going to talk about out of the whole hip hop community that I've seen on Twitter or Reddit. So it's going crazy, and it's just, the timing was perfect. The music that was previewed was perfect, and then you go into the album and you're just left speechless.
He fit in like 3-4 visuals, you know, in the span of 2 weeks, along
and they were
with
hilarious
the billboard
too.
Yeah, the brown sugar salmon, him on the train, that was kind of Wes Anderson influence. That shit was hilarious, and like you were saying, man, he put it out at the right time, and when the music's good, it just makes everything better, and this will end up being one of the best albums of the year without a doubt, and will make our end of the year lists. But let's speak about another album of the year contender, and that's J. Cole's The Off-Season. And this was amazing because we were told about The Off-Season way back in 2018 when J. Cole dropped Album of the Year Freestyle, and that music video started off with, this is a masterclass on preparation, The Off-Season. So the title was already previewed, and then you skip forward to December of 2020, where J. Cole actually posts that checklist of the things that he wants to do before retiring. And on that list, after Revenge of the Dreamers 3 and the feature run, is The Off-Season. So him putting that title in our heads from the get-go really kind of showed us that he was calculated. Like, this was years in the making, and he had a plan to roll this out. And that just speaks to his confidence and gets us more excited for it naturally, right?
It doesn't only get us excited, it makes us sort of question where he's going to go with the project, because The Off-Season was a very intriguing title, because if you are a fan of J. Cole's mixtape runs, you had the warm-up and Friday Night Lights. So think about what he did for the OG fans here, more than, let's say, the newer fans. You know, he really came with this, and he was like, listen, I'm going to wrap up an iconic mixtape series for you guys, because that's where he understands where most of his OG fans come from, and I'm going to deliver it in this modern way that's going to really take over the industry. And again, I spoke about timing with Tyler, but this was even better timed because he was the guy that kind of broke the silence in the industry. He was the first guy to do this. And then you get a visual trailer of him, let's say, cooking up the album in his studio and then doing some work in his, maybe in like an old house in a bedroom. I can't remember off the top of my head where that was located. And then you also got some introspection from Cole where he's talking about his creative decisions. So it was cool because you understood the creative process that went into this project. That's what J. Cole does so well, is that he doesn't only give you the music, he makes you understand how it's created and the intentions that went in it. So what was the best thing that was communicated throughout this whole rollout for you?
I think to me, it was the fact that J. Cole just came out with this album rollout as a very humble artist who's, very honest with his fans. I think that transparency, the fact that he didn't know where to go in terms of his subject matter. He didn't know what to rap about. And that's understandable when you're like 5 albums into your career. So that transparency that we got, in that documentary, mix that in with also, his LA Leakers freestyle, which was
stupid.
Fucking mind-blowing, man. Stupid. Like, I've listened to that at least 25 times because the bars are out of this world. And a lot of people think that it was written. I feel like maybe parts of it were, but I do think that a lot of those bars were off the dome. So that was super impressive and really got me excited for the project. And apart from that, I mean, him making the Slam magazine cover, him, signing a basketball contract to play professionally in the midst of this rollout 4 days before the album comes out. I mean, that's fucking massive. Like, the marketing behind that is just genius.
Because it also ties into this whole theme of sports. Like,
yeah, it does.
He probably thought about it. What do my fans attribute to me the most? And he's going back to his old mixtape days. Hey, that athlete / rapper, that gap between musicians and artists. And he was one of the first guys to do that. We've seen that before with, let's say, acts like Master P, who would actually want to go play preseason games with Charlotte and Toronto. But he went to go play professional basketball at a pretty decently high level in Africa, and was attributing that all to it because he understood what type of media coverage was going to be given to him. Because again, these artists understand how to create narratives. They understand how to create buzz. You don't want to create the wrong types of narratives. You want to create the humble and the positive types. And I think that's what was best executed with this album, was people weren't necessarily talking about how quiet he's been since 2018 or talking about, we're not getting the fall off, or, J. Cole's boring. Like, there was none of that. Like, there was no conversations going on there. It was really like, this guy's creating one of the best rollouts of the year. And it's actually something that the fans are talking about, was how good the rollout was, how good the pre-anticipation was.
And what's amazing too is that, a big part of the rollout was attributed to what J. Cole's previous work was like, because for so many albums, he had no features and kept going platinum without these features. And now you're stepping into a documentary where you see 21 Savage in the studio, and that makes the bells ring off of, okay, 21 Savage is here. Every mixtape from J. Cole has had features, so the offseason is bound to have features. And that was a huge narrative for this album going into it, and that drove a lot of people in. And the fact that he was able to, sort of change his sound, start working with these more modern artists such as Lil Baby and 21 Savage, really showed how he can transcend a new generation and be a very pivotal voice in it. But let's talk about now what I think is probably one of, if not the best album rollout of the last 10 years, and that's Travis Scott's Astroworld, which came out in 2018. Man.
What an album. Let's talk about that. Like, the anticipation to this album was massive because people were actually anticipating Astroworld before Birds in the Trap, and that's massive for fans because you sort of teased them into what the album is going to sound like, and it's actually admitted that some of the material that was written, or let's say created and curated on Astroworld, was done before Birds in the Trap. So Travis Scott had this plan in his vault for such a long time, and it's crazy because he knew that this was going to be his grandest album. But let's talk about how he completely took over social media with this. If you look at, let's say, the trippy and the very bright and, let's say, flamboyant visuals, to the album art, to all of the inflatables that were being let's say put up around the States, and then,
that's what kicked off the rollout. How genius is that, man?
That's massive because now you're actually putting them into the album cover. You're putting them into that environment, and it's getting people excited because they feel as if they're a part of the project. So, take me back to how you felt about this rollout and what really made it for you as a fan of Travis Scott.
To me, like I said, the fact that you had those inflatables really got everybody hyped. I mean, the trailer that he put out for Stargazing was amazing. But to me, what was really revolutionary about this rollout was the merch bundles, because it's been done before, but never on the level of Travis Scott. And that's what Travis Scott knows how to do best, is tap into different cultural areas. And that's what he did here, because if you look at what he did with the drop of Astroworld, for every hour, it was a 24-hour merch cycle where for every hour that the album was dropped, a new piece of merch had dropped on his website. And that was genius, because he tapped into a whole different culture of fashion, and also the culture of unboxing products. And in this case, fans were overwhelmed with hype to not only hear the music, but also to see what merch he was dropping alongside it. And what's mind-blowing to me too, and what speaks to the success of this rollout as a whole, is how Travis Scott leveled the fuck up, man. If you look at, the kind of artist that he was with Birds, and then what he leveled up to with Astroworld, like, it doesn't even make any fucking sense. Like, it shouldn't happen. If you look at the album sales, I think Birds sold close to 80,000 copies first week. 88,000 first week, and Astroworld sold over 500,000 copies first week. And even if you take away, the whole merch bundle thing, half of those sales were pure sales. So it just, the jump from one level to the next in the span of 2 years is fucking miraculous. And he knew what he was doing with the Travis Scott brand. And I mean, of course, him getting with Kylie Jenner also helped out the rollout. I can't deny that, but everything else from a marketing standpoint was beyond genius.
It was super well communicated to the fan base, because it was so extra to the point where it wasn't extra, if I could put it like that. Like, Travis Scott knows his fans and knows how dedicated his fan base is, because they've been riding with him since 2013's Arrow Farrell, and have seen his progression as not only a hip-hop artist, but as a pop star to this point, because you're selling 500,000 copies first week. That's massive numbers. Now you're starting to get into the Drake and Kendrick territory. So going back to this, it was also cool how there was the hidden features, because it added to the overall hype of the album. Like, you're trying to hear what's happening. Like, you're hearing certain artists and you're like, oh fuck, okay, I heard James Blake on this. Oh shit, I heard Frank Ocean. Who is this? Is this T-Pain? Like, oh no, then you find out it's a new artist called Don Toliver. So there was always these iconic moments and narratives that had happened with Astroworld. Then he dropped it towards, you could say midsummer, because it was August 4th, I believe.
August 3rd, yeah.
August 3rd, my bad. So you can maybe say midsummer, but this had lasted for years to go. And even at the time of this recording, Astroworld is still one of the most popular albums out to this date. So
yeah, it is.
Talk about the longevity, man, because that is a very underestimated part about this whole rollout. Because looking at the post, think about how big that Astroworld tour was, with, all of the entertainment and all of, let's say, the rides, and him bringing back this Astroworld to an arena near you.
Well, listen, man, what's crazy is that there was less than a week that had that had happened in between the day that he announced the album and the release date. So he literally did this whole rollout in the span of a couple of days. And, speaking on the longevity, like you were saying, I think Astroworld became the first album on Spotify to have every song have over 100 million streams.
Massive.
And to me, it's the fact that Travis Scott created the fucking universe. Like you said, he brought the album cover to us. He put away these gold inflatables of his face in different locations across the US, and we were literally entering the environment. If you look at the fact of how the album is sequenced and how the tracks are placed, the album feels like a legitimate theme park. It feels like you're going through ups and downs sonically, and that creates this kind of roller coaster effect, which beautifully plays into what the album is all about. So, I mean, going into Utopia now, already he's done a great job of teasing the album, and I feel like this will probably be on the level of Astroworld or maybe even beyond it. So we'll have to see, man.
Let's talk about Donda now. This is a very interesting subject, because this has been a very unique rollout, to say the least, and we've been covering a lot of Donda content on the channel, because it's some of the most exciting stuff that we've seen maybe in hip-hop history. And
exciting but frustrating.
Exciting but frustrating. We'll give it the frustrating word. But, okay, let's talk about these listening parties, and let's talk about how unique this is just for a moment. So, going through the midst of the rollout, and just trying to mention this in the episode real quick, how do you feel going through it, and do you think that it's been as effective as some of the other albums that have dropped this year?
Listen, to me, all I have to say is that this is both one of the best and worst album rollouts that I've experienced this year. But Kanye is doing his job right, because this is probably the most excited that I've been for an album in years, and it's because of all the different questions. It's because of how much hype Kanye has built without saying a single word. It's him previewing this album and taking us through the evolution of the music, seeing the changes from song to song, seeing how many features and how many people he's collaborating with just creates a different level of excitement. And I mean, yes, it's been maybe drawn out for too long at this point. I think we're like almost a month into when he was first spotted with Tyler, but I think he's done a great job of kind of just introducing to us, this new Donda era. But like I said earlier, it's both one of the best and worst album rollouts because he's lying to the fans. He's giving us dates when he probably knows himself that the project isn't ready.
And there's a lot of credible sources that are talking about the official date of this album. Like, you have Beats coming out, you have Def Jam coming out, but let's not get too much into this rollout because we have so much content on the channel about this already. You guys could access all of that, by the way, if you go visit the channel. But let's get on to some of our favorites that haven't dropped this year, that haven't dropped in recent time, but things that have really hit home for us. So I'll let you start, man. Go talk about a rollout that you've really
I'll mention one briefly because I do want to talk about like some past rollouts, but then I'll talk about one that I experienced not too long ago that really hit me. But to start off, I mean, what 50 Cent did with Get Rich or Die Trying, like that was a fucking juggernaut of an album, man. And it's for a couple of reasons. The main one being the fact that it was the perfect underdog story. You know what I mean? A drug dealer gets shot 9 times and lives to tell the story on an album. Not only that, but he was dropped from his label. And then, I mean, like fucking superheroes, here come Eminem and Dr. Dre to rescue 50 Cent, put him in the right limelight where he belongs to be, and give us these street tales that just feel so authentic. And it's a story that just you have to believe because he literally lived through it. So to me, that's something that stood out, forever because of how much hype he had built up as a new artist, and the fact that he had, the mixtapes that preceded the album really added on to that hype. And that's something that we've seen in modern album rollouts where artists drop mixtapes and build up to their debut studio albums. So he's been influential in that category too. But I'll start talking now about Revenge of the Dreamers 3 because this was one of the most revolutionary things that I've seen as a music fan. And before I get too deep into it, what did you personally enjoy out of the rollout?
Out of the Revenge of the Dreamers 3 rollout was all the different snippets that had been posted prior to it, because this was the first time I feel as if so many different artists had started to post content about the album before it had even dropped, So it was also the narratives that were created with it, like, okay, who's going to be featured on this? Because before going into the album, you knew that it was going to be a label tape, but with so many more people, it was like also, hey, listen, is this going to be the first time that J. Cole and Kendrick, come back and after so long after Forbidden Fruit and drop a song? And then we have all these different narratives like, okay, like what is this going to do for J. Cole's career? What is this going to do for Jid? What is this going to do for Baz? Like, how is this going to sound? Because you have so many different collaborators on this project. So I think it was just like, it was exposing the amount of work that had gone into this project. And then when I had finally gone into it, I was super taken away by it because it had answered all of my questions and had done even more. But you go back to it. Why do you think it was your favorite in recent
let me
time?
read off some stats to begin with. So for this album, it took place over a course of 10 days, the recording of it at Tree Sound Studios. A total of 343 artists were invited and 142 songs were recorded during the sessions. And I love this because it was a collective album done like no other. And to me, it wasn't just a couple of artists linking at a studio. This felt like hip-hop summer camp, if you really think about it, because it was this emergence of all these artists, some who, are legendary and some who are up and coming, but that the Dreamville camp wanted to show love to, such as Guapdad 4000 or Buddy, who had, great appearances on the project. But what I loved the most was that it created that sense of urgency, because it must have felt like getting a golden ticket to the fucking the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You know what I mean? Because not every artist got the invite. So it kind of, it created that sense of like, okay, I'm invited here. This is a huge moment in time because only certain artists are, and it kind of created that fear of missing out, of not being a part of it. And also as a fan, it's like, oh, did you hear about who was in the studio today? Did you hear this latest snippet? It really created that sense of urgency in a small amount of time. And what I love too is that this rollout has proven to be influential, because we're seeing that independent artists such as John Sway, Chris Patrick, and a bunch of other talented artists are actually doing their own version of these sessions. And Chris Patrick and John Sway went to LA, this past summer and actually, cooked up for, I think, about over a week, and they named it the Sanctuary Sessions. And it was a bunch of artists merging together and literally, spending their days creating music, collectively. You have people playing instruments, you have people rapping, you have producers there, and it just creates a really unified experience, and I feel like we're missing that in hip hop today, because now it's just let me send the verse in, let me work on my own. But Revenge of the Dreamers 3 brought in that spirit again of a hip hop community, and that's exactly what I loved about it.
Okay, let me go on to my picks now. And I think I'm going to have to take it back to the 2000s decade as kind of like a vintage rollout. And it was with Curtis and Graduation. Like, this was at a time where hip hop still had that competitiveness to it, but it was also at a time where people were questioning the state of hip hop. Is it going to continue with gangster rap, or is Kanye West going to fully take over the industry and bring in this new style and flavor into hip hop, which we eventually saw that Graduation won, but it was the whole thing of the record sales battle. So the whole narrative was created was who's going to sell more first week? Is it going to be Graduation by Kanye West, or is it going to be Curtis by 50 Cent? And this happened back in 2007. So the whole narrative wasn't necessarily about the quality of the projects or who was going to be featured. It was more of like a competition. It was a game. It was bringing back that fierce 1v1 battle that two mega hip-hop artists were coming together and battling against, because thinking about what Kanye West was doing commercially at that time, and then thinking about 50 Cent coming off of Get Rich or Die Trying and The Massacre, it was two mega pivotal points in their careers. And then obviously you saw what those rollouts did for the state of the industry. You know, Kanye ends up dropping Graduation, which was more anthem music and that had more of a pop sort of aesthetic to it, while Curtis had obviously stick to its roots with, you know, gangster rap. And then we saw the way the industry started shifting. We saw how many artists started popping their heads out that were creating that duality in hip hop. So not only was it an exciting time for the fans, but it was also a revolutionary time for the fans. But going off, to one of my favorite rollouts of the past decade is actually Views. And this was actually a rollout that lasted for 2 years, because Drake was actually previewing Views from the 6 in 2014. People didn't think that If You're Reading This Is Too Late was going to come out at all, because it ended up being a surprise album that had dropped in February of 2015. So the whole thing with Views was that it was two projects with If You're Reading This It's Too Late and then What a Time to Be Alive, to bounce off the hype of those two projects and then release Views, which ended up coming out. Not only that, but this is at a time where he also released his Liquor Virginia Black, and he was also a master of the billboards, because the whole sort of vibe was like, I want to go back home to Toronto and I want to make the people in Toronto happy and feel like this is something for them. And coming off of two projects that had so much hype, like What a Time to Be Alive and If You're Reading This Is Too Late, was genius, because you're bringing it back to your fans and you're communicating this so well. And if you want to talk about the commercial success of this album, it put up over, I think
it sold close to like 1 million copies first week, man.
And not
like
only
that's
that,
ridiculous.
And he had dropped a single in One Dance that was his first #1 single that ended up completely creating the hype for the album.
But Summer 16 also created that hype, because that was kind of the first single that didn't end up on the album, but kind of really started putting that, the boy is coming home narrative into play, where it's like Drake is fucking back in Toronto and he wants to put on for the city, and he's going to be, bringing us a variety of sounds. And this is kind of his coming home party. This is almost his victory lap, because he's like, I made it, and now I'm going to take my successes and all of my, I guess, celebratory emotions back to my home city.
And then you have a single like Pop Style that goes away from that dancehall vibe and that, really encaptures what hip hop is, because it features Kanye West and Jay-Z. Then Drake obviously ends up releasing the version without them on Views. But what was also cool was that this rollout had lasted for 2 years. There was so many different rumblings about it, and people really thought that it was going to be called Views from the 6, but it was only until the day that it dropped that it was revealed, hey, listen, it's only going to be called Views. And then you get the iconic album cover that's probably one of the most memorable of the 2010 decade, where Drake is sitting on top of the CN Tower. And that was genius, because not only was it iconic to the fans, but a lot of people started talking about the album cover, because they're like, oh shit, did Drake actually go up there and sit on there? And then
is it real or is it Photoshop?
Then news sources in Toronto had to actually show the comparison, like, listen, his legs would have had to be 11 feet long for him to be able to sit down and position himself like that on the CN Tower.
I didn't fucking believe that when I saw it, man.
But obviously there's going to be fans that buy into it, but Views was massive because it connected to so many people. He had captured the hype of two ridiculously good projects, and If You're Reading This Is It's Too Late and What a Time to Be Alive, and came back even stronger in 2016 with probably one of his best studio albums in my opinion.
Yeah, it's probably my favorite Drake rollout that I've experienced.
It's crazy because he was able to capture so much with so little and really paid homage to Toronto. But
also, the pop-up shops that he had done were also really big too.
He had pop-up shops in Los Angeles, in Miami, and Toronto. There was a lot of different stuff going around the album and a lot of hard work.
Yeah, but guys, listen, it's been a total privilege talking about this because as fans, I mean, these rollouts mean everything to us because that journey and that build-up to the album is really what makes that project, stand the test of time. And, like I mentioned earlier, with The Weeknd's After Hours, his commitment to that role that he played in the album, him doing that Super Bowl performance, him being bandaged up everywhere he went, even for Halloween parties, that's the shit that sticks with fans and that really makes the music and the movement behind the music live and stand for the test of time, man.
And fans love the rollouts. Listen, if there's any artists that are listening to this podcast right now, pay attention to those rollouts because not only will it do better for you guys statistics wise and money wise, but it helps us get into the album. It creates that anticipation. We get to form positive narratives and we have so much fun with it. So guys, listen, thank you so much for coming into another episode. And as I mentioned at the beginning, our Patreon link is now live in the description, so you guys could have a say on our next future episode, which is next week. So you guys could go visit it, guys. Thank you so much for watching this, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for watching the video. It's always a pleasure doing content for you guys. Listen, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel because we're doing album reviews, and we actually have our series called Everything We Know, where we take you guys through the whole album rollout of the hottest releases of the year. Not only that, guys, but our Patreon plan is now live. You guys could access that in the bio. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.